Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Paramita and I heartily welcome you to my channel Paramita PM. If you are new to my channel, then I would request you to go through the content of my channel, look at the videos, and if you really find those videos helpful and if they really heighten your interest, then do like it, share it, and do not forget to subscribe to my channel. And most importantly, please turn on the notification bell button so that you get notified whenever I upload any new videos on my channel. So now, without any further ado, let's get into the lecture. In this video lecture, I will be introducing you to the famous American novelist and short story writer Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was born in the year 1899 on 21st July in the United States, and he breathed his last on 2nd July in the year 1961 in the United States. We all know Hemingway as an American novelist, a very famous short story writer, journalist, and sportsman. Hemingway came up with a style of writing which he called or termed as the theory of omission or the iceberg theory. But unfortunately, this innovative style remained understated, and it should be noted that it cast a very strong influence on 20th century fiction. Ernest Hemingway's full name is Ernest Miller Hemingway. As I have already mentioned, he is an American novelist and a very famous short story writer. He also received the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954 for his famous book The Old Man and the Sea, which was published in 1952 and for which he was also awarded the Pulitzer Prize. Hemingway was noted for the intense masculinity of his writing and for his adventurous and widely publicized life. In fact, his lucid prose style had a very powerful influence on American and British fiction in the 20th century. He was repeatedly rejected for military service. He wanted to join the army, but because he had a defective eye, for that reason he got repeatedly rejected. But then he managed to enter the First World War as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross. Hemingway is known for his famous novels like The Sun Also Rises, which was published in 1926 and which gained him much popularity and success as a novelist. The other two novels that also made him equally famous as a writer were A Farewell to Arms, that was published in 1929, and For Whom the Bell Tolls, which was published in 1940. Most of Hemingway's novels are found to be based on war life or are found to be based on wartime experiences. In fact, during the post-war years, it was found that his writing occupied him much during these post-war years, and he also traveled widely for skiing, bullfighting, fishing, and hunting. And these are certain aspects, that also formed the background for much of his writing. And all these had become part of his life. His novel A Farewell to Arms became so popular that it in fact overshadowed all his works, like the short stories that, in fact, the finest short stories that he had written, like The Killers, The Short Happy Life of Francis Macomber, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, and Cat and Rain, all this. So, A Farewell to Arms became so popular as a novel that it gained him, or it helped him gain much popularity as a novelist. All his life, Hemingway was very much fascinated by war. In fact, the war experiences that he had himself undergone, it fascinated him so much that almost in all his books we come across the theme of war. And he focuses on the consequences of war. What kind of impact does war have on the young generation, on the common man? Ernest Hemingway was so much interested in joining the army that he simply went against his father's wishes and tried, to join the army to see what was going on, or what was happening in the First World War, to witness the action himself. He failed the medical exam. He didn't become successful, but then later on we find that he joined the Red Cross, as an ambulance driver, which I already mentioned. And after arriving on the Italian front, Hemingway witnessed the brutalities of war, the inhumanity, or let's say the brutal actions that involved, you know, uh, men, or that involved soldiers in a war. So when he participated, or when he became a part of the First World War, it helped him gain enough experience that later on, he could incorporate in his literary works, because whatever he witnessed as a soldier while being in the war, it had a very deep impact upon him. Therefore, it fascinated him all his life. And therefore, when we go through his novels, we come across war themes. We come across the consequences of war. We come across, the what kind of effect does war have on the common man, not only physically, but also, on human psyche. In fact, on the first day, of his experience, as a soldier, we find that an ammunition factory, near Milan blew up. And it was this first encounter with death that completely shook him. And it made him see death, you know, as see death, very closely. And therefore, that also, helped him gain an experience that would later on, intervene in his process of writing, or let's say influence his writing. When we are talking about Ernest Hemingway, it also requires to talk about the lost generation. The lost generation, this very term was coined by Gertrude Stein to describe the young American artists, especially mostly writers who rejected American ideals in the 1920s. So, if we look at the date, we understand that it was the post World War I era, and therefore, these young American writers, they shifted to Paris to live the bohemian lifestyle, meaning they got, so much, they were so much in despair that they decided to live a life of hedonism. By the term hedonism, I mean that just living for the present time and not for tomorrow. Simply, giving themselves to drinking, smoking, partying all night. The situation was such that it led the young people of the time, lose all their belief in religion, in the government. Okay, they also lost their values. They lost belief in the idea of human progress because of the devastation that was caused by the First World War. It made this group of people, these young people, Americans, completely disillusioned with their life. And therefore, like I said, because of this state of mind, during this post World War era, this group of writers known as the lost generation emerged. And Ernest Hemingway also belonged to this group. Gertrude Stein was the first. Uh, Gertrude Stein coined this term for the first time, and therefore, this term "lost generation" referred to writers like Ernest Hemingway and other group of American writers as well, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, Eliot, and of course Gertrude Stein. So we can see that the term was used to describe, therefore, to describe the generation of writers who immediately, uh, emerged after the First World War, which means post 1920s. And Ernest Hemingway is one of those American writers who are represented by the lost generation. Because I already mentioned that he focused much on wartime experiences. Therefore, he also, focused on the mental condition of the youths of the time. Like if we read the book, The Sun Also Rises, it completely, very clearly, it provides readers with a very vivid picture of the, Americans of that time, of the young adults of the time, the kind of life they embraced because of the sense of futility, because of the sense of despair that simply, entered into their life. As a writer of the lost generation that emerged in the post World War I era, Ernest Hemingway focused on two types of people in his writings. So, when we read his literary works, we come across the lives of two types of people. One type of people consisted of men and women who lost their faith in morality, who lost their faith in religion, something which they had believed in the pre World War era. But because of the immense bloodshed, because of the disaster that was brought about by the First World War, these young men and women, they completely lost their faith in everything around. Therefore, gave in to a life of despair, a life of, futility, where they completely felt, purposeless, and therefore they did not have respect for anything. Like they lived with cynical disregard, which means that they strictly, very in a very severe, they became very severe, with regard to everything around them except for their own emotional needs. They only became concerned about their own emotional needs. And as far as religion, morality, were concerned, values were concerned, they simply disregarded them. This was one type of people, that Hemingway portrayed in his literary works. The another type were men who were simple and who had primitive emotions, who involved themselves in bullfighting and who were prize fighters. So mainly these are the two types of people that we come across in Hemingway's literary works. Ernest Hemingway was not just a famous American novelist, but he's very, very famous for his short stories. And to name a few, here I have mentioned some of the famous short stories by Hemingway, like The Snows of Kilimanjaro, Hills Like White Elephants, Mr. and Mrs. Elliot, The Old Man at the Bridge, Cat in the Rain, and The End of Something. Of course, this is not the end of the list. We have a good number of interesting short stories by Hemingway. As far as Hemingway's short stories are concerned, we should know that he is famous, for having a very brief, terse, or an ambiguous style in his short stories that can lead to multi uh, multi-layered interpretations. In fact, uh, in his short stories, we come across, symbols, and these symbols are very integral to understanding the story. When we read Hemingway's short stories, we do not get the theme or what the author is trying to convey to the reader at a glance. Okay, and if as a reader we expect that everything will be very explicitly, described, narrated, explained in the story, then Hemingway's short stories would disappoint us. But it is this disappointment that actually heightens the interest of the readers, allowing readers to come up, with their own interpretations, to look at the story from their own perspective by going through the dialogues or the descriptions. Like I already mentioned, that Hemingway's iceberg theory is very famous as a style of writing that he came up with, and that is why it is very well read and well taught, his stories. In fact, it is this iceberg theory that he adopts in his writing that does not explicitly state anything about the theme of the story. Hemingway leaves it completely to the readers to come up with their own explanations, to come up with their own interpretations, and it is this aspect, that makes his story so very personal, because every individual reader, would be able to come up with his or her own respective interpretation. So, one reader may not have the same interpretation that another reader would come up with. And it is this aspect, like I said, that it makes his story so very personal, because every reader would have his or her own way of interpreting the story, because others, might see it differently. So it is this quality of Hemingway's short stories that actually, makes his short stories so very interesting, confounding, and of course enriching at the same time. So I hope I have been able to provide you with a brief introduction about Hemingway, and you have been able to understand or acquire knowledge about Hemingway as an American novelist and short story writer. If you have found the lecture helpful, then do like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. And thank you for watching.